Hello and welcome back to my vlog. We're on to part 15, Sophisms of the Protectionists, and part 3 of chapter 4, Equalizing of the Facilities of Production. I will add that free trade equalizes also the facilities for attaining enjoyments, comforts, and general consumption. The last an object which is, it would seem, quite forgotten, and which is nevertheless all important, since consumption is the main object of all our industrial efforts. Thanks to freedom of trade, we would enjoy here the results of the Portuguese sun, as well as Portugal itself. And the inhabitants of Havre would have in their reach, as well as those of London, and with the same facilities, the advantages which nature has in a mineralogical point of view conferred upon Newcastle. The protectionists may suppose me in a paradoxical humor, for I go farther still. I say, and I sincerely believe, that if any two countries are placed in unequal circumstances as to advantages of production, that one of the two, which is the least favored by nature, will gain most by freedom of commerce. To prove this, I shall be obliged to turn somewhat aside from the form of reasoning which belongs to this work. I will do so, however, first, because the question in discussion turns upon this point, and again, because it will give me the opportunity of exhibiting a law of political economy of the highest importance, and which, well understood, seems to me to be destined to lead back to this science all those sects which, in our days, are seeking in the land of chimeras that social harmony which they have been unable to discover in nature. I speak of the law of consumption, which the majority of political economists may well be reproached with having too much neglected. Consumption is the end, the final cause of all the phenomena of political economy, and consequently in it is found their final solution. No effect, whether favorable or unfavorable, can be arrested permanently upon the producer. The advantages and the disadvantages, which from his relations to nature and to society are his, both equally pass gradually from him, with an almost insensible tendency to be absorbed and fused into the community at large, the community considered as consumers. This is an admirable law, alike in its cause and its effects, and he who shall succeed in making it well understood will have a right to say, I have not, in my passage through the world, forgotten to pay my tribute to society. Every circumstance which favors the work of production is of course hailed with joy by the producers, for its immediate effect is to enable him to render greater services to the community, and to exact from it a greater remuneration. Every circumstance which injures production must equally be the source of uneasiness to him, for its immediate effect is to diminish his services and consequently his remuneration. This is a fortunate and necessary law of nature. The immediate good or evil of favorable or unfavorable circumstances must fall upon the producer, in order to influence him invincibly to seek the one and to avoid the other. Again, when a workman succeeds in his labor, the immediate benefits of this success is received by him. This again is necessary to determine him to devote his attention to it. It is also just, because it is just that an effort crowned with success should bring its own reward. But these effects, good and bad, although permanent in themselves, are not so as regards the producer. If they had been so, a principle of progressive and consequently infinite inequality would have been introduced among men. This good and this evil both therefore pass on to become absorbed in the general destinies of humanity. How does this come about? I will try to make it understood by some examples. Let us go back to the 13th century. Men who gave themselves up to the business of copying received for this service a remuneration regulated by the general rate of profits. Among them is found one who seeks and finds the means of multiplying rapidly copies of the same work. He invents printing. The first effect of this is that the individual is enriched, while many more are impoverished. At the first view, wonderful as this discovery is, one hesitates in deciding whether it is not more injurious than useful. It seems to have introduced into the world, as I said above, an element of infinite inequality. Gutenberg makes large profits by this invention, and perfects the invention by the profits, until all other copyists are ruined. As for the public, the consumer, it gains but little, for Gutenberg takes care to lower the price of books only just so much as is necessary to undersell all rivals. But the great mind which put harmony into the movements of celestial bodies could also give it to the internal mechanism of society. We will see the advantages of this invention escaping from the individual to become forever the common patrimony of mankind. The process finally becomes known. Gutenberg is no longer alone in his art. Others imitate him. Their profits are at first considerable. They are recompensed for being the first who make the effort to imitate the processes of the newly invented art. This again was necessary in order that they might be induced to the effort and thus forward the great and final result to which we approach. They gain much, but they gain less than the inventor, for competition has commenced its work. The price of books now continually decreases. The gains of the imitators diminish in proportion as the invention becomes older, and in the same proportion, imitation becomes less meritorious. Soon the new object of industry attains its normal condition. In other words, the remuneration of printers is no longer an exception to the general rules of remuneration, and, like that of copyists formerly, it is only regulated by the general rate of profits. Here, then, the producer, as such, holds only the old position. The discovery, however, has been made, but the saving of time, labor, effort for a fixed result for a certain number of volumes is realized. But in what is this manifested? In the cheap price of books. For the good of whom? For the good of the consumer, of society, of humanity. Printers, having no longer any peculiar merit, receive no longer a peculiar remuneration. As men, as consumers, they no doubt participate in the advantages which the invention confers upon the community, but that is all. As printers, as producers, they are placed upon the ordinary footing of all other producers. Society pays them for their labor and not for the usefulness of the invention. That has become a gratuitous benefit, a common heritage to mankind. What has been said of printing can be extended to every agent for the advancement of labor, from the nail and the mallet up to the locomotive and the electric telegraph. Society enjoys all by the abundance of its use, its consumption, and it enjoys all gratuitously. For as their effect is to diminish prices, it is evident that just so much of the price as is taken off by their invention renders the production in so far gratuitous. There only remains the actual labor of man to be paid for, and the remainder, which is the result of the invention, is subtracted. At least after the invention has run through the cycle, which I have just described as its destined course. I send for a workman. He brings a saw with him. I pay him 2 francs for his day's labor, and he saws me 25 boards. If the saw had not been invented, he would perhaps not have been able to make 1 board, and I would have paid him the same for his day's labor. The usefulness, then, of the saw is for me a gratuitous gift of nature, or rather, it is a portion of the inheritance which, in common with my brother men, I have received from the genius of my ancestors. I have 2 workmen in my field. The one directs the handle of a plow, the other that of a spade. The result of their day's labor is very different, but the price is the same because their remuneration is proportioned, not to the usefulness of the result, but to the effort the labor given to attain it. I invoke the patience of the reader and beg him to believe that I have not lost sight of free trade. I entreat him only to remember the conclusion at which I have arrived. Remuneration is not proportioned to the usefulness of the articles brought by the producer into the market, but to the labor. More tomorrow. Make it a great day, and bye for now.